The painful truth is that the use of violence
the United Nations General Assembly gathers in October to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the UN.
In much of the world.
United States President Ronald Reagan used the occasion to make his own plea for peace, looking forward to his much-publicized summit meeting in Geneva with the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev.
And I come offering for my own country a new commitment, a fresh start. So yes, let us go to Geneva with both sides committed to dialogue. Let both sides go committed to a world with fewer nuclear weapons, and someday with none. Let both sides go committed to walk together on a safer path into the 21st century and to lay the foundation for enduring peace.
Facing the 74-year-old President Reagan across the table in Geneva will be 54-year-old Soviet Communist Party leader Mikhail Gorbachev. He's emerged in less than a year as a world leader with authority, a man described by British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher as someone we can do business with. Paris was one of the first stops on Gorbachev's visits abroad, and though he's not the Soviet head of state, he was treated almost as if he were. The West has already accepted that Gorbachev is ready to reshape the Soviet Union's relations with the outside world. And the French are as eager as anyone to play a leading role in this process. France has not been directly involved in nuclear arms talks with the Soviet Union, though Mr. Gorbachev has indicated that he would like the French and British nuclear arsenals to be included in negotiations at some point in the future. But the main story from Paris was Gorbachev's public offer to cut the Soviet Union's total number of strategic nuclear warheads by 50% if the United States does the same. It's a bold move which Gorbachev says is aimed at ending the arms race. Not to be outdone, President Reagan promptly came back with a counter-offer.
I have instructed our negotiators in Geneva at the nuclear and space talks to present a new United States proposal designed to advance the prospects for achieving real reductions in nuclear arms, enhancing stability, and addressing the legitimate concerns of the United States and our allies, as well as of the Soviet Union.
President Reagan did not immediately reveal full details of his proposal, but officials said he wants a ban on mobile intercontinental missiles. He would also place a ceiling of 1,500 on each side for cruise missiles. Attention shifted to Geneva in Switzerland, where American-Soviet arms talks have been continuing for years without significant progress. But the Soviets agreed readily to extend the latest round of talks for a further 6 days to consider the Reagan counter-offer. Both sides were setting conditions which might have received a firm no in reply, but both sides indicated they were still willing to negotiate. And coming just 2 weeks before the Reagan-Gorbachev summit, the good atmosphere in Geneva was seen as an encouraging sign. It's the issue of arms in space, though, where technology has made huge strides in the last few years, that could prove to be the hardest bargaining point. Even as the latest offers and counter-offers were being made, American astronauts were out in space, in the orbiting space shuttle. A recent shuttle mission was top secret and assumed to be linked with the American program of developing a new weapons system in space. This includes orbiting weapons that could destroy incoming missiles. It could look something like this. The Americans are also going ahead with researching and developing laser weapons, hence the term Star Wars. It's a project that appeals strongly to President Reagan. President Reagan prefers to call the system his Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI. He insists its main role is defense.
We're talking about the Strategic Defense Initiative now. I'm sorry that anyone ever used the appellation Star Wars for it, because it isn't that. It is purely to see if we can find a defensive weapon so that we can get rid of the idea that our deterrent should be the threat of retaliation, whether from the Russians toward us or us toward them, of the slaughter of millions of people by way of nuclear weapons.
During the United Nations anniversary celebrations, President Reagan took the opportunity to brief government leaders from 5 of his allies about the latest developments. West Germany and Britain in particular have shown enthusiasm towards the SDI project.
To be able to say once more
President
that I'm not
Reagan
going to
even
answer
said
any
in a
questions.
radio interview that he would be prepared to share the new technology with the Russians, indicating that SDI is still open to negotiation. And he'll go to the summit with firm backing from his allies on this and most other major issues.
A dozen times in the last 2 days he was not going to answer questions, so I think we should.
While Ronald Reagan has been in the White House for 5 years, Mikhail Gorbachev has only been in power since March and the death of Konstantin Chernenko. In retrospect, Chernenko was the last of the old guard of Bolsheviks, who's now given way, in the figure of Gorbachev, to a more dynamic, more flexible generation. By the time of Lenin's birthday celebrations in April, Gorbachev was already consolidating himself in power. He appointed 5 of his close supporters to key positions in the leadership of the Communist Party. And in a later shake-up, Gorbachev displayed a hard streak when he removed one of his main rivals, Grigory Romanov, from the Politburo, sending him into early retirement. Almost unheard of for a Soviet leader, Gorbachev has been going on Western-style walkabouts in the streets, as here in Leningrad, talking and, more importantly, listening to the general public. Gorbachev was the youngest Communist Party leader since Joseph Stalin back in 1924, and it's quite possible he could still be leading by the turn of the century. Gorbachev is said to have personally edited the recently released 4th Communist Party program, which lays out social and economic plans until the year 2000. The program predicts a doubling of Soviet economic output in the next 15 years, but avoids the excessive claims of the previous party program set out by Nikita Khrushchev in 1961. This claimed, amongst other things, that Soviet citizens would be earning 2.5 times as much as Americans by 1980. Gorbachev has called repeatedly for greater discipline among the workforce and for younger management and a better use of technology to give new impetus to the economy. The new guidelines are only thinly veiled criticisms of policies in the 1970s and early 80s. And they show that Gorbachev is determined to put his own imprint on the economy as soon as possible. All industrial economies need natural resources, which the Soviet Union has in abundance. But the easily accessible minerals and raw materials have already been exploited, and attention is turning more and more to the frozen wastes of Siberia. The Soviet Union is still the world's largest producer of oil and natural gas, and new fields are expected to boost production by 60% by the end of the decade. Much of it will be sold abroad. New towns and settlements are springing up, following the new industries. As an incentive, workers out here can earn 3 or 4 times the average wage. Agriculture and food remain one of the Soviet Union's headaches. Factories continue to turn out the farming machinery, but even given an improved harvest this year, there will still be an estimated shortfall of 45 billion tons of grain on the official target. Gorbachev knows of the agriculture difficulties from his days as a party secretary under Brezhnev and then Andropov. Now, as then, food subsidies and investments in agriculture account for 1/3 of the entire Soviet budget. Ports on the Soviet Union's eastern Pacific seaboard, like Nakhodka, have expanded as the Siberian wastes continue to be developed. trade with Western countries has increased in the past decade of détente, but Gorbachev has stressed that there must be increasing integration between the socialist members of the Comecon grouping. The socialist economies, he says, must avoid becoming vulnerable to what he calls the hostile actions of imperialism. He does not want the Soviet Union to find itself too dependent on Western trade or technology sometime in the future. Gorbachev, though, seems intent on reviving the East-West contacts that went into reverse during the early years of the Reagan administration. Soviet newspapers have been giving increasing coverage to the United States as the summit approaches, and there were special articles on President Reagan's interview in early November with Soviet journalists.
Well, I'm looking forward to that meeting.
The present American administration has repeatedly asked for time on Soviet television for President Reagan to address the Soviet people without any positive response. This interview was agreed to be the next best thing. The Soviet newspapers were not obliged to carry the full text of the interview, but they did relay President Reagan's expressed desire for peace and normal relations, while claiming that he contradicted his own words by making allegedly groundless accusations against Soviet foreign policy. Soviet television has meanwhile been out on the streets of Moscow, asking the public how they feel about the coming summit.
You know how it is. You can't be 100% sure in the present situation that there'll be an agreement, the kind of agreement that not only we, but people like us in the West will want. All the same, I'm optimistic. I think that Comrade Gorbachev will do all he can. I hope so. And Reagan doesn't only have to answer to Gorbachev, but to world public opinion.
The Russians are sensitive to Western charges of human rights abuses.
They sometimes say that human rights aren't observed here.
Before they start talking about human rights, they should sort things out in their own country. I think they have many more problems than we do.
We're asking people what they think about the prospects for the talks.
People are expecting something, particularly from a meeting like this. I hope for a positive outcome. The whole nation is waiting, and so they should. This deadlock must be broken.
I think they should reach an agreement. It's a problem that worries us all.
So you think they'll find a common language?
Yes.
You as a soldier are aware of the dangers of the arms race.
Of course, we're expecting a lot from this meeting. It would appear that even Reagan, under pressure from world opinion, will be forced to make certain concessions.
There was a sensational development in the propaganda war on November the 4th, involving Vitaly Yurchenko, a senior officer in the Soviet Secret Service who apparently defected to the American side last August. Chernenko re-emerged at a press conference at the Soviet embassy in Washington. He now made the dramatic claim that he had been drugged and abducted.
I was forcibly abducted in Rome by some unknown persons. Unconscious, I was brought from Italy to the USA.
Answering questions from the press, Yurchenko denied he had given the Americans any valuable secrets.
In the period when I was conscious and controlled my behavior, I did not pass any secret information.
Yurchenko said he remembered his chief interrogator well.
Mr. Charlie. His name, it's his code name, one of his code name, Charlie. But it was one main torturer. He hate, it seems to me, hate all humanity, because he is, it seems to me, psychologically sick person.
State Department spokesman Charles Redmond gave the American view.
Since his arrival in the United States on August 2nd, Mr. Yurchenko has willingly cooperated with both the Central Intelligence Agency and the FBI in providing information about Soviet intelligence activities throughout the world and the organization of the KGB. At no time was Mr. Yurchenko held or coerced by improper, illegal, or unethical means. It is Mr. Yurchenko's right to return to the Soviet Union once the United States government is in fact assured that this action is genuinely of his own choosing.
Chernenko did leave, with the Americans powerless to stop him. There was no definite proof, but diplomatic observers were sure that Chernenko had only pretended to defect. Either way, the Americans were greatly embarrassed, and the Soviet Union appeared to have scored a major propaganda coup just 2 weeks before the Geneva summit. One of the Soviet Union's main concerns as the summit meeting approached was an aim shared by the Americans, presenting a united front with its allies. The communist military grouping is the Warsaw Pact, formed 30 years ago as a counter to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Under Gorbachev, arms strength, and especially arms in Europe, continued to dominate military thinking. The Soviet Union has followed with close interest the revival of the nuclear disarmament movement in Western Europe, although it's always been careful not to get involved with the Western groups, which right-wing politicians sometimes claim to be communist-inspired. The anti-nuclear movement, though, crosses all political and social barriers. Despite regular demonstrations, Britain's campaign for nuclear disarmament could not prevent the Conservative government accepting American cruise missiles in the United Kingdom. The cruise missile issue is currently a hot political issue in Holland, centering on the small town of Woensdrecht. The small Dutch airbase here is the site chosen for the deployment of 48 American cruise missiles by 1988, a decision taken on the first day of November by the Dutch centre-right coalition. This follows the line taken by Britain, West Germany, Belgium and Italy, where at least 143 cruise and Pershing missiles, according to NATO sources, have already been deployed. A small group of young protesters have tried to keep a peace camp on the perimeter of the airbase, but it's nowhere near as large as the one at Greenham Common in England, for example. The young Dutch here claim that they're regularly harassed by police, who destroy their shelters and confiscate their possessions. But despite the onset of the winter months, the protesters feel a moral obligation to continue their vigil. The small peace camp, though, gives a false impression of the strength of national feeling. Thousands of protesters descended on The Hague on the weekend before the decision to deploy was taken. The disarmament movement has a long history in Holland. The country has no personal quarrel with the Soviet Union, yet all the medium-range missiles on Dutch territory will be targeted against Eastern Europe. And if Holland were itself to become the target of hostile missiles, it would suffer severely, being one of the most densely populated countries in Western Europe. The anti-nuclear movement succeeded in gathering 3.75 million signatures against cruise, this in a nation of only 15 million people. In a final attempt to influence the government, the peace campaigners handed over the petition to Prime Minister Ruud Lubbers. The Prime Minister at least had the political courage to come along and face his critics, but to the embarrassment of the moderates in the peace movement, most of the audience refused to listen to his reply. The band started playing, and people turned their backs on the Prime Minister. Lubbers felt more at home at a meeting afterwards of his Christian Democrat Party. They've supported his line of attempting separate negotiations with the Soviet Union. In an exchange of letters, the Dutch government, under pressure from the anti-nuclear lobby, said it would postpone its decision to accept cruise missiles if the Soviet Union reduced the number of its own medium-range missiles. The Dutch wanted an overall limit of 378 of the Soviet SS-20 missiles. The Soviets offered to have targeted on Europe just 243 of their estimated 441 missiles. It was not enough to prevent the Dutch decision to deploy.
Did today's message, though,
Prime Minister
leave you
Lubbers
with a
insists that he
fundamental
has
doubt in
taken
your
a
mind
responsible
that
decision,
maybe
though he says it
may have
was
to
a
backtrack
difficult
one day
one,
because
trying
of
to
the strength
steer
of
a
opinion
middle
you face?
course.
In fact, I had and I have two problems here all the time. One of them is to fulfill my responsibility, trying to avoid escalation in arms race. I did my utmost the last year. We took this special position. It was not an easy one within the alliance. This is one aspect. Another aspect is that I have to avoid as much as possible polarization in the Dutch society. I didn't want to go the way last year to say, okay, we have 51% majority in parliament and we'll take a decision right now. I've taken another 1.5 years to try the utmost in negotiations, in the direct dialogue with Moscow. And now I think it was very worthwhile because more Dutch people than in the past will understand such a decision.
Dutch acceptance of the cruise missiles was an encouragement to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which held its own meeting in Brussels at the end of October in preparation for the Geneva summit. The final communique from the defense ministers described the Soviet pre-summit proposals on arms cuts as one-sided and self-serving.
You see a Soviet missile program come to an end. They just keep on growing. This one has grown very rapidly in the last few months.
American Secretary of State Caspar Weinberger kept up the criticism of Soviet attitudes, but the NATO ministers officially welcomed the Soviet statement on hopes for a meaningful arms agreement. It remains unclear, though, how far the United States is ready to negotiate over Star Wars. In spite of the billions of dollars it would cost, President Reagan insists it would be worthwhile, guaranteeing a sound defense against incoming missiles. The Star Wars supporters have even made a promotional video.
I asked my daddy what this Star Wars stuff is all about. He said that right now we can't protect ourselves from nuclear weapons. And that's why the president wants to build the peace shield. It would stop missiles in outer space so they couldn't hit our house. Then nobody could win a war. And if nobody could win a war, there's no reason to start one. My daddy's smart.
Support the peace shield.
There's also a dramatic anti-Star Wars video.
Twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what...
The heavens are for wonder, not for war. Stop Star Wars. Stop weapons in space.
Mr. Shevardnadze, are you
Star
coming
Wars,
with a new proposal?
superpower involvement in third world countries, and reductions in intermediate and strategic nuclear weapons. The three main issues involving the United States and the Soviet Union. Each side's attitudes to the major issues were outlined at a meeting between President Reagan and the Soviet Foreign Minister, Eduard Shevardnadze. They were developed still further on a trip to Moscow by the American Secretary of State, George Shultz, as part of the preparations for the summit. During the 5 years of the Reagan administration, US policy towards the Soviet Union has been consistent, a firm determination to halt the spread of Moscow-inspired communism. The brief spells of Soviet leadership under Andropov and Chernenko, following the death of Leonid Brezhnev, gave little opportunity for progress and continuity in East-West contacts, and the arms talks in Geneva ground almost to a halt. Under the new and dynamic leadership of Party Secretary Gorbachev, though, here presiding for the first time at the anniversary celebrations of the revolution, hopes have risen on both sides that the Geneva summit meeting can achieve some positive results. The Soviet military parade just 12 days before the meeting starts in Geneva suggests that Mr. Gorbachev does not feel he's negotiating from a position of weakness. Both he and President Reagan say they're ready to discuss arms cuts, but long and difficult negotiations still lie ahead. The Geneva summit will only be the start.